Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're here today to talk about how corporate America is tackling climate change. And I want to go around the table and let everyone introduce themselves. And as we do that, I think it's a good way to start is to just say, if for the three of you from companies, what your company is doing and why. And Anne, we'll start with you with the news this morning from the White House.
Sure. I'm Ann Kelly, and I am Senior Program Director of Public Policy at Ceres. And with the 81 companies that are making commitments today, we're sending a very strong message to international negotiators about the fact that the U.S. is serious about climate change. So it's very significant.
Thanks. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I'm Melissa Lavinson. I'm our PG&E Corporation's Vice President of Federal Affairs and Policy and our Chief Sustainability Officer. And we've made one of the commitments today, and we've made a multifaceted commitment really around the electricity and natural gas that we supply to our customers. We've made a commitment around the work that we're doing with our customers and communities to reduce energy usage and to use energy more efficiently, and a commitment around work that we're doing both at our own facilities and also encouraging our employees to do the same at home. So we've really thought about this in a holistic way and really trying to do everything we can as a company to contribute to greenhouse gas reductions.
Excellent. Welcome. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm Ben Walsh. I'm a business reporter at the Huffington Post, and I'm going to be moderating the conversation. Lars.
I'm Lars Peterson. I'm president for IKEA in US. And today we are taking the next step into actually committing to a low carbon emission situation. And we have put quite a lot of money in our budget to do that, €1 billion extra on the top of the 1.5 that we already have. And we have quite a long list of commitments that we have taken going forward into 2020 and beyond.
Great. Thanks for being here.
Hi, I'm Laura Bishop, and I'm Vice President of Public Affairs and Sustainability at Best Buy. And Best Buy has made a commitment as well with the White House that we will reduce our carbon emissions by 45% by 2020. And this is, both operational reductions as well as a commitment to renewable energy. And we see this as a real vital part of doing business in the U.S. and around the globe. So that's one part of it. The other piece of our commitment is really to help consumers live more sustainably. We're in a unique position at Best Buy where the things that we sell plug in, and we know that we can help by reducing the energy impact of all of those products, as well as help and teach consumers about the impacts of those products on the climate. So that's where we stand.
Excellent. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Well, so I want to talk kind of first about, and you mentioned the number of companies that are making commitments to have a positive impact on climate change. And I wanted to talk for a moment a little bit about, you mentioned Paris, and we know that the U.S. Domestically has had kind of a fraught history with enacting federal climate policy.
Yes.
And that there are members of the federal government who are elected essentially on positions to be intransigent with respect to climate change. And we've heard news that Mitch McConnell has been calling foreign leaders, the Senate leader has been calling foreign leaders and telling them, don't believe anything the U.S. says on climate because I'm going to try to scuttle it in the Senate. What do you think this declaration can do to push back on that? And then after that, to any of you three, what do you think that your individual companies can do to try to move intransigent pockets of the U.S. government?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ben. One of the key things about the pledge you should remember, in addition to all the operational commitments that the 81 companies made, each and every company, and remember they come from across the country and across the political spectrum, have said, we stand with the president for a strong global deal in Paris. That's really important to any member of Congress. These are leading businesses, they are employers, they have done the math. They are really the leading indicator of progress. And so often, as in this case, the law is the lagging indicator of progress. These are the folks who are getting it done. They're doing the math. They're saying to global negotiators, we'll have your backs. This is what needs to happen. We are prepared, whether we're an energy provider or an energy user, we are purchaser. We are prepared for the transition to a low-carbon economy, as Lars just noted. And that's an important signal if you're a lawmaker, and I believe they will pay attention. And I'm also encouraged by what I'm seeing at the state level from energy officials, but that's another topic maybe we'll get to. But overall, I think it's sending exactly the right message to U.S. leaders and to global negotiators.
Melissa, what do you think about that in terms of, PG&E having the president's back in terms of a strong global deal, and then what does a strong global deal look like for you guys?
Well, I think for us, for PG&E Corporation, so we're the parent company of Pacific Gas and Electric, so we serve 16 million people throughout Northern and Central California providing gas and electric service. And as Ann said, while there's action that's occurred at the federal level, a lot of action has taken place at the state and local level. Yes. And if you look at a state like California that's been at the forefront in terms of advancing climate policy over the past several decades, really, if you think about it, starting with energy efficiency policies, going to renewable, then AB 32, and now with the enactment of SB 350 just a couple weeks ago in California.
Hold on, stop. For listeners who don't know what SB 350
sure.
is.
Yes, so SB 350 was a law that was just enacted in California that would essentially reduce energy usage at existing buildings by about 50%, and then also, more importantly for the utility sector, create a 50% renewable portfolio standard by 2030. So again, if you put that on top of California's cap and trade program that already exists, you're going to see really significant greenhouse gas reductions. While right now at PG&E, about 55% of the electricity we provide our customers is greenhouse gas free. You're going to see that number just increase over time. So all that's to say is, while federal government hasn't necessarily passed a comprehensive climate law, there's activity occurring both in the West, in California, also in the Northeast. And so I think that does send actually a really important message. And as more business gets used to operating within a carbon-constrained world, when you see investments being made on the technology side to really both integrate and advance new technologies, I think those are the kinds of things that are going to move us forward, and those are the kinds of things that are going to allow us to actually meet a very strong global commitment.
I would just add to that I don't think it's necessarily that we need to, as a business, react to policy right now as much as we're just moving ahead. This makes good business sense as well as the right thing for the environment. So reducing our carbon footprint and putting a goal out there by 2020 to reduce our carbon footprint by 45% really looks at the impacts that climate has had on our business, as well as the savings that come with reducing our carbon footprint. As a retailer, we are subject to so many things that relate to weather. And as Best Buy, the holiday season is the most important season of the year. So when our stores are impacted because of snow or because of cold, and customers can't get there, or we can't have our employees get into those stores, it has a real impact on the business. We need to see some significant change, and as a business, we'll get ahead of this and hope that policymakers follow along.
You mentioned savings for your company. Is that mainly driven in cost savings, in sort of energy cost, or reduced use from efficiency gains?
Yes. So it's cost savings. It's kind of both. So with our goal, when we're looking at the reductions, it'll be both our energy management in our stores. We've centralized an energy management system that controls all of our energy for our stores. It's lighting retrofits that we've done to the stores to conserve energy. And, with our transportation systems, and let's talk about Geek Squad, our service unit of Best Buy. We've really maximized their routes, and we're looking at more energy efficient cars for those type of deliveries as well as routes, as well as those cars. So it's good.
So something the CFO can get behind.
Something the CFO can definitely get behind.
And that's obviously incredibly important. And Lars, IKEA is, for customers, is famous for its low prices. And what a lot of people might not know is that as an organization, it's sort of famously thrifty in the way that it does business. And there's an emphasis on keeping costs down at every level. Do you see climate change and IKEA's response to it as fitting into that, or is it broader? How do you kind of see it see the actions that IKEA is taking fitting into sort of the ethos of the company and sort of the daily business practices? Because if these kind of things aren't connected to how the company does business, long term they don't really kind of stick.
Already from the beginning, we decided that we would to create a better everyday life for the many people. And the many people are, of course, our customers, but it's also about the people working for us, and as many as we can ever meet. So, I mean, it starts with our 700 million visitors and customers to our stores. Actually, they can make a lot of difference. So for us, sustainable life at home is the starting point. That we are now selling LED lamps exclusively from 1st of September, for instance. We don't have incandescent lamp anymore. We have induction ovens. We have water-saving taps. We have cold start in our taps, our faucets. So you have just the cold splash instead of starting the boiler immediately, and so on and so forth. Many products that help people to save energy. But then it, of course, also in the back end when it comes to the production of energy. And we are actually decided, we have a commitment now for 2020 that we will produce as much energy as we consume. And it's not many retailers who are producing energy in the world, but we are actually doing that. And in US, we now have 2 wind farms up and running, one in Houston, Illinois, and one in Cameron County in Texas. And with the 90% of all our stores have also solar panels on top of their stores and our warehouses. So now we will, by the end of November, we will actually produce 4 times more energy in US than we are using. And I think that are things that we really can do. And it's, of course, the CFO is very happy for that, because we are selling the energy to the grid, and then we are buying it back, so to say, when normal. Then we're trying now to limit also our own use by for instance, having LED lamps in all our stores and in all our factories. And then now the last store we opened, or the latest store we opened in St. Louis, is 100% LED store, which consumes 80% less energy. And of course, it's all about who we are as a company, better everyday life for the many people, but it's also about business. And those 2 things can absolutely go together in good harmony.
What do you think that there's maybe this is a question for sort of the fundamental level of what IKEA's business model is, or what Best Buy's business model is that you're taking something and you're selling it for slightly more than it costs to produce it, and that there are externalities, as economists call them, costs that aren't harnessed in that price, that allow you to do that. Are there ways that there is something fundamentally unsustainable about retail, and that maybe there is a real significant issue there, and that you guys can't get past that unless there is a drastic change to energy production and resource production that government policy has to do? So I'm basically asking the question of, is there a fundamental contradiction that you guys kind of can't get around in terms of how sustainable your business is unless there's significant government action?
Well, I've given this a lot of thought. If I could interject, and everyone here, both of you, I think, Ben, you're onto something really important, because you're seeing all these companies like IKEA and Best Buy today taking these steps absent comprehensive federal or international global policy, raising the question of, well, why should we have international global policy if they're making so many advances? But trust me, and I'm sure all 3 of these companies could say, they have run into barriers. They have had to get over hurdles. It has not been easy to make the kinds of operational changes they have made. They have done it. But it would be infinitely easier if we could actually put a price on carbon, put together a policy framework that allows for systemic change on all the levels that these companies are acting on. That's just my 2 cents, but they can say it better than I am, sure.
Yeah, I think a price on carbon is absolutely something that, over time is something that we need. And, we've tried to do it in the U.S. at a national level, weren't successful. You're seeing it happen at state levels. Again, California has its program, the Northeast has its program. We'll see the Clean Power Plan come into play for the power sector and see how that evolves over time and what that means from an investment standpoint. I think you're going to see a lot of transition there, but ultimately having some sort of national, international program where there is a price on carbon would obviously make it much easier in terms of aligning incentives, aligning investment, and aligning technology.
Can you maybe just, for people who aren't kind of completely versed in the economics of climate change, can you talk a little bit about what it means when we say a price on carbon, and then how that can impact what kind of things we decide to build, what kind of resources we decide to, dig up or drill, and just so people kind of have that reference point.
Sure. I mean, I can start, and obviously everyone has their thoughts. When we talk about putting a price on carbon, obviously the production of energy from fossil fuels emits carbon dioxide. And so it's right now, as you mentioned, it's an externality that isn't necessarily priced uniformly, definitely not in the U.S. or globally. And so if it's something that you want to measure, something that you want to value, creating some sort of market price on carbon that can show you essentially, if I'm going to produce energy that's less carbon intensive, there is a value to that. There's a value to that to somebody, whether it be in a greenhouse gas trading regime, or whether it be from tax policy, or whatever it is, that there is a value in reducing the amount of carbon that you put into the atmosphere. And so, there have been programs in place at state level that have done that. There are some international trading regimes out there, particularly in Europe, right, that we've seen do that. But again, at some point, getting to some sort of global agreement where there is more of an international trading regime around carbon will be, I think, important to really have a global response to a global problem.
Terrific summary by Melissa. I would just add the T word, which is a carbon tax, which we can now say in Washington. And there's robust discussions going on, and again, across the political spectrum, about what a carbon tax scheme might look like. And that's a healthy discussion. It's happening also at the state level. I mean, you tax the thing you don't want, right? It's that simple. And all the economists agree this is an incredibly efficient way to solve the problem.
Well, and that you sort of hinted at it, but there's a kind of long-standing Washington regulatory dance around, is it a carbon market or is it a carbon tax? Can you talk a little bit about sort of what the difference between those are, and what, it's easy to say advantages to both, right? But there is an emerging kind of economist consensus that a tax really makes a lot more sense. But can you talk a little about why that is?
Well, it may be that we've had difficulties with markets of late, in the last decade, shall we say, that there is perhaps a level of distrust around the possibility of trading and derivatives because of what we've been through, and we know that that certainly affected the debate during the Waxman-Markey conversation. And so it seems as though economists are starting to agree that a tax is just a cleaner, more efficient, more equitable way to price the externality that fossil fuels create. Now, how that's done, the distributive impacts of that, the specific model, of course, that's a much more detailed discussion that we're going to have here today. But the good news is it's a healthy discussion that's happening. And it's one of the things that we look at when we think about a global deal, is how could you incorporate a cost of carbon and do that so that in various jurisdictions you can link up those various systems. And essentially, you're taxing the thing that we want to get rid of. It just makes perfect sense.
But as a retailer, I also think that we need to take our responsibility backwards in the supply chain. I mean, we are using almost 1% of the world's production of cotton. We're using quite a lot of wood in the world, and that is also connected to the climate change. And how is that harvested? How is it worked with? And what is also the connection to the social thing? How is what kind of deal does the farmer have in India for doing growing cotton?
Right.
And there we have taken quite drastic decisions. So by 2020, for instance, all forest or carton or paper that we are using will come from sustainable sources, which is of course a very big job, because then it's the world. Then it's not about the jurisdiction in one country. Then we need to understand everywhere that we are sourcing, and the same sort of decisions taken also on cotton. And a couple of weeks from now we will come out and talk about what we actually very detailed what we have done and the commitments on better cotton, because that's really important, because using less pesticides, much less water, and have a better deal for the farmer. And then the climate change question comes in a more global perspective. And of course it's about carbon emission, but it's also about how does it look backwards in the supply chain.
Right.
Yeah. And we've been looking at something similar, especially on the paper and cardboard. So as you can imagine, all of our things are shipped to consumers in boxes or as they're shipped to our stores.
Right.
And so we've been looking at our working on sustainable forestry, including our insert, which as we produce that and it comes in your Sunday paper, definitely looking at ways to reduce that usage as well. And we tie it really back to that forest and that impact that we can all have on climate change.
From a media perspective, declining newspaper circulation is helping you partially there.
Perhaps, but
So we internet publishers are doing our part to cut that back. But you talked, Anne, a little bit about the how you, if there is a carbon tax, how do you distribute those costs? I feel like a utility company probably has some thoughts on that, because there is, if you wanted to find maybe the easiest, most direct way, it's just that everyone's utility bill goes up a little more, and everything gets a little more expensive at the gas pump. What do you think about a tax versus a carbon market and those distributive impacts that Anne was discussing?
Well, in California, we actually have a carbon market and it's functioning quite well. And they have figured out a way to basically deal with those distributive impacts and actually manage costs to consumers through the way that they allocated the carbon credits. And again, the market's functioning. We've seen real reductions, and we've managed to, help energy consumers with their bills through a transition period. So I think, there are, you can look at a tax, you can look at a market. I think at the end of the day, though, fundamentally, when you implement either one, you're going to answer the same set of questions. Same thing, when you're creating a carbon market, where do you put the point of regulation? How do you allocate allowances? To whom do you allocate them? How do you flow the revenues back through, to manage costs or to advance technology? So it's the same thing on a carbon tax. Where do you place the tax? Who pays the tax? What do you do with the revenue? So I'm not sure one is easier than the other. It's just sort of what are we comfortable with? What has a proven track record in terms of getting real environmental improvements? And I think if you look at markets, and whether it be carbon markets or SO2 markets or NOx markets, it's something that we have a long history with in this country, and that they work quite well. And so I think we've been very pleased with California, and we're going to look to see what happens post 2020 in terms of implementation.
And you mentioned technology. I think when people think of carbon, climate, and technology, they immediately think of solar panels or windmills. But really, utilities have a lot of technology that is not those two things that have to do with climate and with carbon. Can you talk? You've made commitments around your grid. Can you talk a little bit about, first of all, starting with what is the grid? When you say the grid, what do you mean? Because it's maybe the least sexy topic in U.S. policies. The energy grid.
Right. Least sexy, but one of the most important.
Absolutely. So
absolutely.
what is the energy grid when you say the grid, and how does it impact renewable energy and climate?
Sure. So when I talk about the grid, we're talking about the transmission and distribution wires that bring electricity to your homes from wherever that electricity is being produced. So it's all up and down the supply chain. So from power plants, whether they be fossil fuel fire facilities, solar, large scale wind, large scale biomass, large scale hydro. Over the transmission wires, they take a step down to the distribution wires, and then we distribute that. Those wires go to everybody's home business, and that's how you get your electricity. Today, when we look at the grid, the grid was really designed for that kind of model, right? A one-way power flow. Large power plants, transmission wires, take a step down. We distribute power to homes. Today, with the advent of all kinds of demand-side technologies or smaller supply-side technologies like distributed generation, electric vehicles.
And when you say distributed generation, you mean rooftop solar panels?
Rooftop solar, distributed storage, energy storage, or whatever the next generation is of whatever some sort of distributed kind of energy could be. you're looking at things on the distribution side, the transmission side, and everywhere in between. And so what we're really seeing is a fundamental shift in how the grid is designed, how the grid is managed, how it's operated. And in order to really accommodate those two-way power flows and to really provide that value to all those clean energy technologies that want to plug into the grid, that takes a tremendous amount of investment. And so one of the commitments we've made is committing to approximately $3 billion a year in total grid investment between now and 2020. And what that $3 billion is doing, it's really modernizing, upgrading the grid so that it can accommodate whatever end-use technology anyone wants to use, whether it be, again, distributed solar, electric vehicles, really high-end energy management systems at places like Best Buy or IKEA, and also bringing in the large-scale solar or wind, and making it all work together in a seamless fashion. And I think that, like you said, it's sort of an undervalued, underappreciated aspect of all this, but we really fundamentally believe to make a clean energy economy work and work efficiently, you're going to need a modern 21st century grid to accommodate what everybody wants to do. And that's a huge piece of our commitment, is to making that work for everybody.
And I think, just building on what Melissa said, those partnerships between businesses are vital too. So we have great partnerships with the utility companies and offering incentives to consumers to purchase more sustainable products as well. And those are out there. I mean, that's making a big change. So with 14 states, we have partnerships on solar panels, for example. We're selling solar panels to consumers in those 14 states, and there's energy and incentive credits, both working with the utility companies, but also through those local state governments as well. And that provides a lot of incentives. Or Energy Star products. So Best Buy sells more Energy Star products than any other retailer. And what we saw last year is that we could help consumers save almost $70 million in their utility bills just from the Energy Star products that we sold. So those type of looking at the market in that way, with incentivizing consumers to buy those products and those partnerships within business, I think is really important.
And Lars, are you seeing at IKEA consumer demand for those kind of sustainable products? Is that something that...
Oh, absolutely.
So that you're labeling it and saying, and making it sort of a product feature rather than something that needs to be obscured and kind of hidden in the packaging?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think people are really more and more asking for it, and I think the LED bulbs was the first thing that people really became really, really interested in, and understanding that you can save 80% of your consumption. Then there is, of course, it costs a little bit more still, but a result of it, and you can use it for 20,000 hours burning time. And their technology has helped us tremendously to take the next step. And I think that's continue to evolve. So we will come out with new products all the time that would have the same kind of feature. But when we talk about technology, I also think when we talk about governments, and I also think we should look at waste handling, which is a very big question also. And I think now I've been traveling around to between 20 and 30 of our stores here in US since I started in January. And I can see that every city have different solutions for waste handling. And that's something that I will ask the government to say, well, let's have some idea about that. And because then we can actually do what we would like to do, 90% of recycling of all our stuff up until 2020, and then also the customer can do that. Today there is a tremendous variance between throwing everything in one bin to 6 different bins.
Right.
And we have products that can provide for that if you want to buy it, but the inconsistency in the different cities and government here is actually a big problem, and this is a big opportunity for US actually to have an harmonizing on that.
I would agree. So electronics recycling is something that we've had a leadership role in accepting electronics for take back in our stores. We've recycled over 1 billion pounds of electronics since the inception of our program. But it is very difficult on a state-by-state and locality basis to find solutions for consumers as well, so for electronics. So we end up in a state like Colorado where They have a ban on landfill ban where you can't put electronics in landfill. Totally think that that's the right approach, but there aren't other places to bring your used electronics right now than Best Buy. So we need to find ways to also create opportunity in those through those local governments and through that infrastructure for others to want to step up and recycle, because we don't have Best Buys everywhere throughout the state or everywhere, but we'll do our part. But it does need to be solved more holistically as well. And we'd love to see a national policy on electronics recycling instead of this state-by-state approach. For now, it is doing the right thing, and consumers do have options, but we know that consumers move from one state to the next, and trying to figure that out and finding those solutions is really important and something we're committed to.
So, Anne, I have a question for you, which sort of gets to what Laura and Lars were talking about in terms of consumer demand and interest in sustainable products and climate, and how that's driving corporate commitment. And there was a story in the New York Times about a couple days ago, about the rising level of corporate commitments at the product level. And there was a management professor from UCLA who was quoted, who did a study on corporate commitments to climate. And what he said is he's seeing more and more companies have been combining poor environmental performance with positive communication about environmental performance. Basically saying that companies are seeing the market opportunity and seizing it with a label rather than with action. How do you at Ceres, are you seeing the same thing? And if you are, how do you feel that you can address and combat it?
I'd say there's a range. And it would be wrong to suggest that all companies are alike. There's definitely a range in terms of commitment and leadership. But in the digital age, it is going to be very, very difficult for companies to make public commitments, as these companies are today, all 81 of them, and then to not follow up on those. I mean, they don't have a choice. It's not even like it was 10 years ago. These are going to be out there, and they're going to be exposed. I was on a show with several college students after Starbucks made their commitment about 100% renewable, and the conversation was about every time you get a latte saying, "I'll take that with cream and it'll be solar powered, please." What needs to happen, and the data from the millennials, if I may talk about that particular age group, which is really important to pay attention to, both as consumers and as employees, is that they are aware and that they care. I mean, that data is pretty solid now, and that to retain individuals in that age group, you're going to have to, and to attract them, you're going to have to be credible about your sustainability commitment. They're not stupid. I think that more and more, when companies make a mistake, and I'm not going to use any names of particular recent examples, but that sort of thing is being found out and it's being uncovered. And of course, Ceres, we do some of that, but there are lots of other groups that are looking very, very closely and scrutinizing commitments and looking at the supply chain very carefully and calling out contradiction, calling out misalignment. So, at Ceres, honestly, we focus on the leadership and the success of our various companies, and there's plenty of it, like we're seeing right here today. I don't think companies who are fraudulent in the way that you are describing are going to last very long at doing that. I think what's going to happen is, as we move forward, you'll see increased accountability, increased transparency, and increased demand from this particular generation that is just not going to settle for anything less. That's my sense.
Okay, okay, and then I'll say the elephant in the room here is Volkswagen, and there have been, in terms of the costs of, they're still being tallied and won't be tallied for years to come. But there are some costs that go far beyond the market value of the entire company to clean up this, if you take into account brand diminution. So I think that it's a good point that the market really, when it does see particularly blatant, brazen attempts like this, it really severely punishes companies. As a utility, how do you deal with sort of thinking about who your consumer is? Because for these folks, they walk into the store, they leave with an object. your consumers just get a bill every month. And I think that utilities kind of constantly have this problem of no one's particularly brand loyal to their utility. No one really says, oh, you've got to see the way this light turns on. It's an expectation, right? And so you only care when something goes wrong. How do you feel like you can connect with people so that they feel like that they know what's going on at their utility, which most people don't really, I would hazard, but also that they care.
Right. Well, I mean, a couple things, and Laura mentioned partnerships. Really important, and that's something actually PG&E has worked really closely with its customers and communities for a number of years now particularly on energy efficiency, demand response. Engaging in terms of implementing distributed solar. So it's something that we actually do put a premium on, is that outreach, that partnership, and that engagement. And part of that also is, California has done right by putting the right policies in place to encourage that, particularly on the energy efficiency and demand response side. So it does provide us with that real opportunity to engage with the consumer, to educate them and to help them understand, how to most efficiently use the energy, whether electricity or natural gas, in order, for them to both reduce environmental footprint, but also to save money. And so that is something that's really important. You touched on something about utilities. We are ubiquitous. We're in every neighborhood, every community, every state. We're everywhere, and that is a challenge in terms of folks understanding where their electricity comes from and understanding that there's something behind turning on that light switch. And so because I think we've done a very good job as utilities of safe, affordable, reliable over time, that it's an expectation, which is wonderful. But what makes us unique as utilities is, we really are mission driven, right? We are public service entities. Most of us have charters, right? That's what we do. And because we're so ubiquitous, because we have such a big footprint, we really can bring clean energy to scale. If you want to bring energy efficiency to scale, working with utilities in partnership, that's tremendous opportunity. If you want to bring, solar to low-income communities, right? Working with utilities, we can do it at scale. If you want to decarbonize the transportation sector, electric vehicles and vehicle charging, utility infrastructure can be used at scale. So I think that, as utilities, we need to, continue to educate folks on the value we bring, and also reminding folks the value that we brought over the years. And again, that's back to that sort of modernized grid, the grid that's worked so well for us for so long. We have an opportunity to really take it to the next level, to really encourage and support everything that our customers want to do. And all the technology innovation that we're seeing, and it's a role that we're excited about, and it's something that we look forward to talking more about. And so thanks for the opportunity today to talk a little bit about what we can do in that.
I think on the consumer piece, that's interesting though, and how you relate it to that average consumer. I love it when I get my bill and it says what my consumption is versus my neighbors and others in my community, because it challenges me to look at things a little bit differently, or I do a cheer when I realize that I'm ahead.
Well, not everyone. So let's talk a little about what that is, because not everyone not every utility
does that.
Customer has that opportunity. But so what exactly are you talking about? And
so I'm talking about kind of my monthly bill, where I will get something that says, here is how your usage of energy compares to your direct neighborhood and community.
Right.
And it does challenge you to, and it'll be a graph that shows, you over the time as well as in comparison to your neighbors.
And that's a real life example of investment in grid modernization. So the reason why utilities are able to do that now is because of the investment that many of us have made in smart meter technology, sort of automated meters in the communication. So, if you think about, used to be analog and, things spun and that's where you got your data from. Well, now with that, sort of two-way communication device, and we're able to collect data in a much different way than we were able to collect it previously, we're able to synthesize that data, aggregate it, and work with, again, innovators, technology providers to help provide that kind of information to consumers. So for PG&E, for example, we have a partnership with a company called O-Power, which is headquartered, right here in Northern Virginia. And they allow us, through the partnership we have with them, through working with them, with the data that we've collected through those investments we've made, to then provide that kind of information to our consumers. And so then they can make better choices about how they're using energy, when they use energy. We can then advise them in terms of, hey, we think that, this seems how you're using your energy. You might want to think about these kinds of products, devices, et cetera, because, it's a good investment for you. You'll get a return on your investment if you, make these kinds of investments in your home. And so it's that kind of interaction that we're going to see more and more of, and it's because of the investments, again, we're making in the grid in order to facilitate this kind of interaction.
One of the things I think is really fascinating about those kind of programs that compare individual users is that they're just incredibly effective.
Yep.
And that I think there are other utilities, maybe you've done this too, who have tested those kind of programs and other programs that say, hey, for every, $5 you spend on your utility bill, there's so many emissions associated with that cost. And the sort of competitive keeping up with the Joneses tactic is the most successful one, because it just says, listen, it's not abstract. You're using more energy than the person next to you.
Right.
And people do kind of cut it out.
Right.
I think that's a really interesting insight into sort of what drives people, and it less that they might not care about climate change, but more that they want concrete kind of rules and grid lines to follow.
I hope it's a little bit of both.
I think it's a little bit of both. I've heard about roof envy in neighborhoods where some people have solar and some people don't. There's no question about what we've now learned in the social science about our tribal tendencies and how much we are affected by what our peers and partners and neighbors do.
Do you think that there's a competitive dynamic with companies as you have? So now we have 81 companies with the White House pledge. Do you think that there's a competitive dynamic where you can go to companies that weren't on that list and say, why have 2 or 3 of your competitors have joined? You need to get on the boat?
Well, I've certainly been known to do that. I believe in the race to the top in all sectors. I'll tell you that when we put out a statement of 10 food CEOs a couple weeks ago about their commitment, I got calls from many others saying, hey, when can we join? But I should let these 3 talk about that and whether that's effective.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I think for us, this is, of course, starts with who we are, but it's also about our business. We think that our coworkers and our customers will, of course, ask us and our competitors to do what we are doing. And I think this is just going to be more and more important for the future. So absolutely.
I would say something very similar. I think that when it is who we are and we have such a commitment already ingrained in sustainability with many of the programs that we've been offering, you don't want to be an outlier in any of this. This is an opportunity for all of us to step into the conversation in a bigger way and really showcase the things that we're proud of and that we're doing. And I would say, to that same point, our employees are asking and demanding this, our consumers, and we want to also attract new employees, and we know this is important.
I think the talent piece is so huge. We hear it all the time from folks interested in working at our company, that part of what's brought them there, or part of why they're interested in pursuing it or taking a look at it is because they've seen what we've done historically, and they're looking to what we're planning to do in the future, and they want to be a part of that, and that's really exciting.
And I mean, utilities are kind of, like I said before, you've done such a good job at making sure that the core mission, which is that the electricity is there when you flip the switch. And you guys are on one end of the spectrum in terms of, California has really solid programs and regulations that are pushing all of the utilities in the state there. There are some other states that don't have those. Do you look at those other utilities that are kind of still just doing power plant to transmission line to distribution to home and kind of not really, and do you look at them and kind of say, you're behind the curve? Do you think that they're going to get there? Or is California a political outlier and PG&E is, a utility outlier?
Well, I think actually, a lot of states and a lot of utilities have made a tremendous amount of progress over the past, 5 to 10 years. If you're looking at the amount of investment all the utilities are making in new technology, in cleaner technology, in grid investments, it's pretty significant. I mean, it's $80, $100 billion a year industry-wide. We're looking at $1 trillion over a decade in this. And, a lot of companies have taken advantage of, a lot of opportunities that went out there. If you look back at the stimulus bill, at the ARB, there was actually, monies in there for utilities to do the smart meter deployment. And that was really significant. So you really did see an uptick across the country. And then again, once the utilities make those investments, all of a sudden they have the information, the data, the capabilities. You're seeing a lot of utilities, plan for clean power plant implementation. Working with their states, really engaging with the stakeholders and trying to figure out, how our state's going to put together plans that make the most sense for their state, but that also make the most sense, in interconnected markets. And so what are the investments that they're going to need to make over the next, 5 to 10 years to really fully implement the clean power plan? So you're seeing a lot of activity in the utility space. Even as far as what's the intersection of the electric sector and the transportation sector. Mm-hmm. Huge commitment in the utility sector in terms of electrification and what's the role that we play as utilities in electrification. Because if you decarbonize electricity, mm-hmm. That really gives you a jumpstart to decarbonize transportation. And, companies like Best Buy or IKEA that have a big transportation footprint, mm-hmm. all of a sudden this can help them meet their goals.
Sure.
Yep. And so here's a question that I kind of want to put to each of you, which is we talked a little bit about Paris at the start, and then this is, and we mentioned the price on carbon has been a recurring theme. There's a price on carbon, and that's one thing that a lot of people are looking for in what kind of is being described as a strong agreement. What is something for each of you that beyond a price on carbon you're looking for in a quote-unquote strong agreement that maybe doesn't get mentioned as often? If there's a line or two about a project that might not be headline news, but that you would see as really encouraging. Start with Anne.
Yeah, a few things. Fundamentally, the agreement has to be strong enough so that it sends a signal to investors about the transition to a low-carbon economy. So that's what we use the shorthand, strong global deal. It's got to send an appropriate signal globally. More specifically, of course, a price on carbon. In addition, we look for climate finance. It's fundamental. If we are going to establish trust around the table, you always hear climate finance will lubricate the global deal. What that means is, the developed countries made a commitment around the Green Climate Fund, and it really has to be financed. We really have to meet that agreement. We're seeing progress in that way, but there's got to be finance to help the less developed countries adapt to the ravages of climate change that they did not create, fundamentally. And we see positive movement in that direction. The other item I'd mention would be a ratchet mechanism, which would allow for the commitments that are made now to be looked at again in 5 years and to be gradually ratcheted up so that we can continue to revisit, we call them INDCs. The countries have made commitments about their emissions reductions. The U.S., for example, 28% reduction below 2005 levels by 2025. I'm sure everyone's already memorized that figure. It's a really important number, and I mention it only because these commitments we're hearing today are helping us to get to that goal. Now, we need to then revisit that goal as time goes on. All countries have to revisit their goals and continue to tighten them and continue to reduce emissions, and that should be built into an agreement, and I would just add that the agreement should be transparent.
How are you? Thoughts?
Sure. I think a lot, again, what Anne said makes, immense sense and definitely needs to be part of an agreement. I think, when we look at it also, some of the things that we're looking for is, how those commitments are developed and sort of what's the next level down of what countries are saying about how the relationship between sort of how the various sectors of their economy are going to interact. I think that's a really important piece of it, and particularly in the U.S. Again, how does an electric sector interact with the transportation sector, interact with an agricultural sector, right? Because they are all interrelated. Mm-hmm. As you've heard today, people are looking at their supply chain, right? IKEA's looking at supply chain. It's if you look back of if other parts of the economy recognize that there's something that they need to do, it helps just kind of flow through. So I think that relationship and taking a more holistic view is important, and so that'd be something that we would hope would be discussed. as a utility and as a domestic-only company, one of the things that we're really focused on now, and in order for the U.S. to make its commitments, is to really ensure that, while we're doing things to modernize our system, right, both PG&E, but as utilities in general, we need to look at the policies that are supporting that, right, and take a look at, the policies need to be aligned with where we want to go. So whether it be tax policy, permitting policy, carbon policy, rate-making policies, we really do need to take a look at those and make sure that they're aligned and encouraging the kind of investment we need, not just, for the next year or two, but make sure that there's sustainable investments over time.
Mm-hmm. And Lars, how about you? What are you looking for ideally out of Paris beyond a price on carbon? What would be the kind of the thing that you would look through the agreement and say, that makes me happy?
I think that to acknowledge what we are doing, we try to take a leadership in these questions, to have a sustainable economy from start to finish, a complete holistic view on what we're doing. And I think that the best result is, of course, that others are following us, the suppliers and other players in this field, and of course that we can influence also lawmakers and regulators to take good decisions in this. So I think not a particular decision, but that is moving ahead, because this is a big question. And I think to take a complete responsibility, both from our customers having more sustainable life at home, that we are taking down the level of energy that we are consuming to a level where we are actually self-sufficient, and that we are also taking a responsibility for material like cotton and wood, and actually the people working from the supplier in India or wherever up to sort of say the transporter and the people working in our stores. So it's actually a complete package, customers, material, energy, and people in the whole supply chain. And I think if people would see that as a good example, then I'm happy.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just build on what everybody said. I think that I'll touch back on what Anne said about transparency. I think that's very important. As companies here that make commitments, we're very transparent in measuring our progress along the way. We need to see that in an agreement here, very multifaceted, and see how they're tracking the progress to 2020 and beyond. I think that's very important. We'll be looking at our goal, to 2020. We had a goal for carbon that was 20% by 2020. We achieved that at a 26% right now, and have had to reset our goal. If they're tracking above where they are, we need to know that so that they can reset those goals as well to be more aggressive, because we need to get there as an economy, and I'd like to see that on the international scale too. I'd also like to see more directed at those individual consumers. We see that that's so important as well. So those incentives that go along with consumers wanting to live a more sustainable life, we'd like to see ways that incentivize that. We know the administration has been committed to that with their appliance standards and looking at the setting of this appliance standards and electric use, and we think that that's really important to have that consumer angle in there too.
Got it. And so take it back to the beginning. Anne, you mentioned transparency. Are you talking about transparency of the actual agreement or transparency of achievement? Because one of the big question marks that pops up all the time is in international agreements is transparency around China specifically meeting its goals. And there are questions on official statistics from China in everything from oil and gas consumption to GDP and to currency. And so the question then becomes, well, climate, is that just going to be another one of those things that we can't trust them on? And is that what you're referring to?
Yes, it is. It's both the setting of the goal and the how that goal is met, and if that goal is reached. And then, as Laura says, when the goal is met, you have to follow the example that Best Buy has set and others, and then ratchet it up. I got to meet with some of the folks in the White House who negotiated that deal with China, and it is really worth taking a closer look at because they did build in a fair number of accountability mechanisms that will allow the U.S. to track the progress going on in China. It's vital that that kind of accountability be built into the agreement. And Ben, if I could, I just want to underscore something that Lars said that I think is really important, and I don't want it to get lost today in all these announcements. A holistic view of this problem. It isn't just about emissions per se. It is about the whole supply chain. And many of these companies have made commitments about and relating to the people who grow the cotton, grow the food, harvest the food, sew the clothing. And companies are sophisticated enough now to take a much broader view of that full supply chain, which relates directly back to one of the elements I mentioned, which is climate finance. We have to take care of the people who grow and produce the goods that we all enjoy. And we have to take care of their homes, their farms, their facilities, their livelihoods. And that's all part of making a robust climate change commitment. So I'm just glad that both Lars and Laura highlighted that, and I want to emphasize it, that you'll hear that from many of the companies today. It's important.
Got it. All right. Well, we are out of time. Thank you so much. That's a good note to end on. It's been really great having you here, and
Thank you.
appreciate the insights, the information.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.